Guild. I'm from Uena County, representing the Southwest District for the Young Farmer and Rancher Committee. It's my great pleasure and opportunity to introduce our next speaker. Scott Bennett serves as the American Farm Bureau Federation's Director of Congressional Relations. His issue portfolio is comprised of livestock and related issues, including GIPSA, cell-based protein, gene editing, and mandatory price reporting. Scott also manages AFBF's efforts on hemp, child nutrition, dietary guidelines, and agricultural research. Scott also served as legislative director for former House Judiciary Chairman Bob Goodley, where Scott guided the chairman through policy decisions as a conferee for the 2018 Farm Bill. Scott was born and raised in Red House, Virginia, on his family's purebred Angus, Gelbvieh, and Hereford cattle operation. Scott earned his bachelor's degree in agricultural economics from Virginia Tech and now resides in Arlington, Virginia. Serves on the board for the Animal Agricultural Alliance, VA 4-H Foundation, and VA FFA Foundation. So if you'd all join with me in welcoming Scott Bennett.
Did you bring the mic?
Caleb, thank you so much for that introduction. I trust that I'm live and well here and everyone can hear me and see me.
Can we hear? Yep, they can hear and see you.
All right, well, that's great. Well, look, I appreciate everyone's time. It's 5:30 here on the East Coast, just about a mile south of the capital of the United States where I reside. It's been a heck of a week as we've had our AFBF convention and got a lot of stuff done there. What I plan to do, I have 45 minutes and I know the focus of the presentation was primarily meant to be around cell-based protein, alternative proteins. We'll hit on that, but I certainly want to we'll open it up to just about anything as it relates to livestock agriculture. I cover the livestock portfolio for American Farm Bureau. I've been there for 2 years. As Caleb mentioned in my introduction, I've had experience on Capitol Hill. I've worked at a small lobbying firm before that, but most importantly, I was born and raised into the cattle business. My father, grandfather, 2 uncles, and a cousin make their full-time living on our farm east of the Mississippi. It's a farm, but we raise purebred Angus, Gelbvieh, and Polled Hereford cattle. We sell about 500 purebred registered bulls a year. The first Friday in December, and then the second Saturday in April, we have an annual production sale. I remain involved on our operation at home, which is about 3.5 hours south of where I am right now. So I'm mighty blessed to continue to be involved there. And, I can be working the hill on a Friday afternoon, and by Saturday morning, I'm calving and feeding hay and doing all the chores at home, which is surely nice. All that to be said, I get it. I get the practical side of things, the real world implications of what we do here in Washington, and I really take that to heart. I'm the first male in my family since 1929 to not derive their full-time income from Knoll Crest Farm. So it's a big deal that I've stepped away, at least for the short term. I have intentions of returning back to my family operation at some point in the future. So I want to talk about, we'll kick things off and talk about, cell-based meat, but I want to really kind of change how we talk about that and kind of refer to them as alternative proteins. And the reason I want to change kind of the way we talk about things and call them alternative proteins is because we have several different buckets of alternative proteins that we're talking about. I'll kind of break down everything from a market standpoint. Then we'll get into the regulatory side of things. There's really not much legislatively on this, but there's a lot going on regulatorily between the FDA and the USDA on this issue. And then once we cover that, it'll be a natural segue to talk about gene-edited livestock because there's, from a regulatory standpoint, there's a lot of parallels there. But certainly I'm open to discussing anything that happened at the American Farm Bureau Federation Convention this past week, new policy that we passed, and certainly, you know, an outlook kind of into this new 117th Congress as it pertains to livestock issues, everything from mandatory minimum negotiated trade, country of origin labeling, product of the USA, livestock mandatory reporting. We'll plan to cover it all. And the best part and what I enjoy the most about these type of presentations is the question and answer. So I hope you guys think about some questions, and I look forward to answering them for you as best as I can. So when we talk about alternative proteins, it's important to really break them down into two buckets. And I'm kind of, the reason I deliver it this way is because you all are the ones that are talking to consumers and your neighbors and those that might not be as familiar with it as you are. It's important to really keep a couple things in mind. So when I talk about alternative proteins, there's two buckets. So on one side, we have plant-based alternative proteins, right? That's your, you know, Boca burgers, you know, your plant-based burgers that you see for sale now, the Beyond Burger, these type of things that Burger King and other retailers have for sale. I know that they're available at the grocery store, things like that. The second bucket is cell-based protein, which is a derivative of, you know, of a muscle tissue, essentially, that's developed in a laboratory that is, you know, would be essentially a product of a muscle tissue that's developed in a laboratory and then sold. So as we all know, your plant-based protein, that's for sale today. You see the commercials, you see it for sale in your grocery store. It's on the market, and, you know, people are consuming these products, you know, as we speak. But when we talk about the cell-based protein and that side of things, those are not for sale in the United States for public consumption yet. And when I first started at Farm Bureau 2 years ago, one of the very first meetings I took was at USDA, and it was a public forum, and it was at that point in time. So we're talking, you know, late 2019, fall of 2019. USDA and FDA, they knew that they were going to have to address this issue from a regulatory standpoint. There was no avenue for these products to be sold in the United States unless they were able to be regulated. So we had essentially a turf battle between FDA and USDA on who's going to regulate this. And I kind of break down the politics of the various stakeholders. And again, I just want you to remind yourself, we're talking about cell-based protein here. FDA and USDA in the fall of 2019, they actually entered into a memorandum of understanding. And what that memorandum of understanding dictated was, you know, what side of the industry the FDA was going to regulate, and then what side of that industry USDA was going to regulate. FDA claimed that the developmental stages of cell-based protein they could handle, but certainly USDA wanted to stake claim to the labeling of these products and certainly the mass production of these products. And that's very important as we think about how FDA regulates food products and how USDA regulates meat products. So as we all know, you know, a meat packing plant, there's a USDA FSIS, Food Safety Inspection Service inspector that has to be present in that facility in order for it to run. We find that very important. The United States is by far and away the global leader on safety concerns when it comes to meat. We have the safest meat supply in the world, and it's because of that FSIS inspector that is required to be present for any production to happen in a meat processing facility. So we entered this kind of debate with those that were thinking about producing cell-based protein because a lot of those companies, they wanted FDA to regulate their product. And the concern there is FDA, they regulate a lot of food manufacturing, but it's not meat. And it's, let's use a bakery, for example. A bakery is FDA inspected for health concerns and for, certain criteria that they would need to pass in order for that to, for them to maintain production. But the issue there is there's not an FDA inspector there full time like you see with USDA on meat production. So, in fact, FDA kind of regulates things on a risk-based assessment. So if Scott Bennett has a bakery, I might not see an FDA inspector but once a year. And, they come in unexpectedly and they inspect my facilities for cleanliness and, for all of the criteria that they have there, which is great. But certainly it's not to the par that USDA FSIS would establish with meat inspection. So the interesting thing here is that these companies, they want to call it meat, but they don't want it inspected like meat. And American Farm Bureau has issue with that. We really feel like if these companies want to call it meat, which again we would disagree with, certainly it needs to be inspected as such. And we feel that USDA needs to have the jurisdiction over the inspection process in order for them to, maintain standards in their production that would be similar to that in a packing plant. So we have this memorandum of understanding that was agreed to in 2019. There's really not been much happened since then from a regulatory standpoint. And really, in all of 2020, this has been a mute issue. Obviously, we really only had a couple of months in 2020 that were normal. Friday, the 13th of March was the day that I think we all recall that was the day that President Trump announced national emergency, which was coronavirus, COVID-19. And since then, especially here in Washington, as it pertains to ag policy, those things really kind of took a back seat while we were advocating for, all of our grower payments and producer payments and all the various relief aid that the government's provided since then. But we really struggle with the issue that these companies want to call it meat, but they don't have it they don't really want it to be inspected as such. So we have this memorandum of understanding. We support at American Farm Bureau support this MOU. And as of now, that's kind of where things stand. No one has really tested this MOU because we haven't had any products really come to market or any company really try and pursue this regulatory framework that we have in place. Like I mentioned, you cannot go anywhere in the United States and buy cell-based protein. And when we look at the companies that develop this product, a lot of them are based overseas, Israel, the United Kingdom, Brazil. Those are really the hot spots for development right now, some in the United States. But the reason it's really prevalent in those countries is because they have a regulatory framework in place for folks to potentially navigate if they were to bring a product to market. I will say, again, my family being in a cattle business and in the beef business, this kind of shakes us to our boots, right? Because we think that this could potentially put us out of business if it becomes something of scale or really is something that we would have to reckon with. But I just totally disagree with that viewpoint. Let's look at the beef production, especially you all in Wyoming is a better example than anything you would find here on the East Coast. Your cattle are grazing land that can't be used for anything else. And it is the most efficient, the efficacy of growing cattle for meat is top of line. I mean, it's sustainable. It's safe, especially through FSIS inspection. So my kind of, what I tell a consumer that would like to try between one or the other is, if you're gonna consume a cell-based protein and you're doing it for a social reason, a social cause, sustainability, maybe animal rights, they don't want to consume the meat from an animal that was alive, but maybe they can justify it because it came out of a laboratory. I put them to cause on that because there's nothing more sustainable. There's nothing more efficient. There's nothing more safe than our conventional meat production here in the United States. And if anyone feels that they are consuming or want to consume cell-based protein from a sustainability aspect, I just don't see the fight in that because that's in my opinion, a losing battle because certainly we produce it as much more sustainably and efficiently and cost effective to that. When these cell-based proteins, let's say they do come to market, right? No land-grant university is doing research on this. There's no public research being done on it. It's all private funded dollars, venture capitalists, Silicon Valley, California. It's people that have invested millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars into the development of the technology. And, you can't sell that up against your $2.99 a pound 80/20 at Walmart and think you're going to be competitive. So, when this product becomes available, and I think it will, it's not going to be in your local grocery store competing against ground beef or anything of that nature. These products are going to be sold in the highest of high-end steakhouses. They're going to be sold in these foodie type restaurants where people go in, they know what they're buying. They're going to have to pay a premium on it because these venture capitalists, these people that invested all this money into this technology, they're looking to get their money back. And it's not going to happen unless they have to charge quite a premium for it. So I think initially, this product is going to be for the creme de la creme people that are pursuing this for a certain reason. Certainly as time moves on, economies of scale may play into factor, and we see the cost per pound of this product be reduced. And maybe at some point in the future we'll actually have to see this compete against conventional meat production, but I don't think that's anywhere in the next 15 or 20 years, in my opinion. The development of this product is done, and I liken it to a brewery. So imagine your big steel vats, your production like that. Of course, right now, if you were to read the newspapers and things like that to talk about this product, all you see is a lab coat, a petri dish, a microscope, things like that. That's not how this is going to be produced. It's going to be produced in vats. It's going to be produced in mass quantities. Certainly, they're going to the least path of resistance is to go after some type of ground product, mummification, they're not going to be able to reproduce, that 16, 17, 18-inch ribeye, whole muscle cut that's marbled prime. I mean, I just don't see that. That's a long ways away. This is product that is going to compete against ground product that we produce, now extremely efficiently blended together. Again, $2.99 a pound. I use that kind of as a base price. But I also like to, kind of talk about who the consumer is. And I mentioned that, initially this is only going to be available in your high-end steakhouses or foodie type restaurants where people are consuming this as an experience, more so as something that they're going to base their diet around. I think about that, single mother that goes to her local grocery store and she stands at the meat counter and, it's either pork, chicken, or beef. And based on the promos that are running that week, that's going to be what she decides to feed her family on for the next week. This is anywhere close to her mind. I mean, the left coast, the right coast, the East Coast, West Coast, these are the people that are talking about it. These are the people that can afford this. Unfortunately, as we all know, those are the type of people that tend to control, the narrative on these products, or in society as a whole. And I think folks in Wyoming and folks that you have to drive past so many ranches to get to town to buy your groceries. This isn't on there. This is not going to be the center of their plate anytime soon, if ever. And when we talk about price elasticity between those, that pork, chicken, beef, this is just, so far away from reaching that mainstream consumer that, quite frankly, I'm really not concerned about what it may do to the general marketplace. And that kind of brings me to my next point, and that is, I think there's been a lot of discussion over the past few years as this has really come to light over, oh my goodness, people are going to start consuming this instead of buying beef that's run, hanging carcasses is run through a packing plant. But I would, tend to disagree there. What we need to do as an industry, right? Let's talk about beef industry, the cattle industry in particular. Of course, chicken is probably easier to replicate through this process, pork being second and beef being last. But, rather than focusing on the piece of the pie, if you understand where I'm coming from, of market saturation, certainly this type of product is going to take away a piece of the pie. And rather than focusing on the significance of how big that piece of the pie is, I think we as protein producers in the United States, we need to focus on growing the size of the pie rather than focusing on the small piece of the pie that a product like this would take from us. Because if we grow that size of the pie, if we increase exports, if we increase consumer demand for our products, then the shareholder that owns the majority of the pie, which is conventional meat production, they stand to grow at an exponential rate of those that only have access to that sliver of the pie. So, with that said, I think it's more important that we focus on exports. We continue to uphold our food safety standards that we have for meat production, and kind of go from there. Because again, for anyone that's consuming this from a sustainability standpoint or any type of social standpoint, I mean, if they were really concerned about sustainability, they'd go down to the store and buy a ribeye. They wouldn't be waiting for someone to make it in the laboratory. And you know, when, again, I kind of will rest my case with that. I know there's been a lot of hype in the media about this. It's certainly sensational. It's fun to talk about because it's new and it's cutting edge. But let's look back at the pandemic. Back in March, April, I mean, certainly we saw, you know, good Lord, the packing capacity plummet. I mean, we saw grocery store shelves empty. And why were they empty? I mean, you know, while many of you all may have concern that they were empty at some point in time, that's because the general public, when you know, when they were pressed on the issue, they ran to the meat counter and they bought meat, and they bought eggs and milk and butter, and they took it back home and they put it in the freezer to try and weather the storm of this pandemic. So, you know, while folks tend to, well, I don't want to get off on too much of a personal tangent, but you know, folks tend to have. It's natural that people worry about something, and before this pandemic, the vast majority of consumers really didn't have much to worry about. So they worried about, you know, was the chicken that they ate, was it in a cage or not? Was it free range? You know, was the beef grass fed or was it conventionally raised? That type of thing. Then when this pandemic hit, all of a sudden, those type of worries hit the back burner. And now all of a sudden they became worried about, oh my goodness, I just need to get something and put it in my freezer, put it in my refrigerator so I can feed my family. And that's when they ran back to the meat case. And that's why the grocery store shelves were empty. Certainly additional factors played into it. We saw packing capacity plummet because a lot of the plants were shut down because the workers had COVID. But you know, that ultimately is kind of light at the end of the tunnel that, you know, in pressing times, our consumers run back to us for the products that we produce. So to kind of put a lid on cell-based protein, and I'll kind of venture into gene-edited animals, which plays a parallel to cell-based protein. I generally don't think we have a whole lot to worry about. I think, you know, we haven't seen anything. We haven't seen a company really try and test our regulatory, you know, scheme here in the United States. We certainly would like to see a lot more done at USDA and FDA to strengthen that memorandum of understanding. But for now, it is sufficient. And we at American Farm Bureau support that memorandum of understanding. I'll kind of switch gears now and talk about gene-edited animals. That's another topic. Again, I see a lot of parallels from a regulatory standpoint. And again, it's another sensational issue that people like to talk about because it's cutting edge and it's sexy. And, you know, it's something that we've just simply never seen before. So when we talk about gene-edited animals, this is something that it's not the same as a GMO, right? This is something that, so a GMO, when we talk about corn or beans being GMO, that is taking a trait maybe from another plant and implanting that gene into corn in order to develop a certain trait, right? So Roundup Ready or something like that. But on the gene-edited animal side, that's actually taking something within the species and manipulating that gene. So again, we're in the Hereford business, so you've got polled and horned Herefords. This would be something as simple as taking a horned Hereford and turning it into polled, right? So this is something within the species of manipulating that gene. In all, you know, not to simplify it too much, but this is something that when we talk about gene-edited animals could be done through selective breeding. Certainly it might take generations upon generations upon generations of selective breeding to get there, but it could be done that way. And so in the United States, we have been working on our regulatory scheme around gene edited animals for quite some time. The main reason is money, right? There's a lot of innovation. There's a lot of money being poured into this research. It's being done overseas. Well, I look at Brazil primarily. A lot of countries in South America are really developing significantly their gene edited animals and their protocols around that. But here in the United States, we're just behind the 8 ball. We have not pushed out any significant regulatory protocol around regulating any type of gene edited animal. And it's imperative that we do so. So similarly to the cell-based protein, we've got this turf war between FDA and USDA, right? So FDA, more so than on the cell-based protein, really wants authority over regulating gene edited animals. They've been aggressive about that. We at American Farm Bureau have really fought against it. We think that USDA should be the primary regulatory body for that type of a product. And so ultimately where we stand today is, again, another memorandum of understanding between those two agencies. So FDA stands to regulate the developmental stages of a gene edited animal, right? So, the efficacy, the development of it. But let's say a gene edited animal were to come into production and we were able to, produce wildly a gene edited animal. USDA would then have the regulatory authority over that. We see that at American Farm Bureau as a very positive thing. We do not want FDA coming anywhere close to your ranch or your farm to further regulate you. You have enough to deal with as it is, and we don't need another regulatory body on your ranch telling you what to do or what not to do if you were to enter into this business. So, we saw a couple of weeks ago and a notice for a proposed rule by USDA to really, it was an aggressive move by USDA to kind of stake their claim to USDA and say, no, we have the regulatory authority over this. It's important for us at American Farm Bureau to see that through because if USDA were to establish themselves as that regulatory body, then we can hopefully see all of this research and development dollars globally come back to the United States because people would be incentivized to, research and develop gene edited animals in the United States because they knew if they came to, something that they would like to push to the public, we would have that regulatory avenue for them to pursue, and we would stand to gain from that. You all may not be familiar with it, but here in Virginia especially, and again, I don't want to get too talk too much personal about it, but my mother actually has a condition called alpha-gal, and it is a condition where it's actually a tick-borne illness. And so she was bitten by a tick and it was transferred to her through the tick bite that, in fact, hooved animals, there's a protein in hooved animals that she is now allergic to. So believe it or not, my father comes off the ranch every day and has to eat chicken or something of that nature, or fish, because my mother cannot eat the meat from a hooved animal because she'll have an allergic reaction to it. So one of the first things that we've seen in gene edited animals is actually a pork product or some pork that have been genetically edited to have eliminated the protein that is primarily found in the fat of hooved animals that would cause someone like my mother to have an allergic reaction to consumption of that meat. So there's things like that are really important. When we talk about gene edited animals too, I don't want people to think that we're trying to develop cattle that have 5 legs and 2 heads and things like that. We're really more focused on, taking some dairy breeds and polling them. We're talking about black-hided animals that slick off faster so that they can grow more efficiently in more tropical climates like South America and places more, closer to the equator. Things like alpha-gal, eliminating a particular protein in their meat so that, more people can consume it. It's things like that really stand to gain on gene editing side. Double muscling even, so that there's higher rate of gain in some of these tropical environments where these cattle are out on pasture and certainly don't yield or grade quite like they would in the United States on a grain diet. So we kind of and politically there's been FDA and USDA are kind of fighting one another on cell-based protein and gene-edited animals. So in the past year, in 18 months, we've seen kind of some horse trading on where USDA would like to land on regulating these 2 different products versus FDA. Certainly all of our chips are in for USDA to be the primary regulatory body on both of these products. We feel like that things are headed in our direction there, but really only time will tell. But both FDA and USDA, as I've mentioned, have this MOU in place for both of those products, and as it currently stands, we're pleased with where they are. With that, I kind of will wrap up my discussion on those couple topics. Again, I cover all livestock issues at American Farm Bureau. So if there is anything on your mind relative to policy that we just passed at our annual convention, or, kind of what you're looking forward to in the 117th Congress, I can dive into that. I guess with that, I can open it up to questions, or I can kind of get more into some general livestock policy, but I'll kind of leave it open to questions now, and we can go from there.
Does anybody have any questions for Scott? Go ahead. Okay, Scott, so the question, if you didn't hear, is about the gene-edited livestock and whether they would have to be marketed specifically, if there would have to be policy so that the consumer would have to know if that is a gene-edited animal, or if you're even to that kind of point in the policies yet.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And, at this point, there's nothing established on that. So, obviously, if you were to gene edit an animal to go from horn to polled, that meat should be the same. And there's been no genetic differentiation on that. But certainly, I guess to simplify it and answer the question, no, we don't really know yet. You would think that in the future, there would have to be a disclaimer that this product came from a genetically edited animal. If you're buying, let's say, meat in the grocery store that came from a gene edited animal, but right now there's no disclosure on GMOs. That's all done voluntarily. So to bluntly answer your question, we don't know yet. And so, when these things come to market right now, quite frankly, you can't differentiate one from the other. Just like when you pull the hide off of an animal, you don't know if it was a red-hided animal or a black-hided animal. But certainly we'll be closely monitoring that as these products come to market. And we're still a long ways away from anything coming to market on either the cell-based protein or the gene-edited side of things. Thank you for your question. Are there any other questions?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Did you hear that at all, Scott?
No, sir, I didn't. If you could repeat.
So she wants to know why maybe they use the term cell-based protein when it's all cell-based. Is there maybe a particular reason that you know of why they would use that in describing what it is that they're doing?
Yeah, so, and that's a great question. And it's one that, we've really tackled at American Farm Bureau and industry as a whole have tackled. The fact of the matter is, these products are originally derived from muscle tissue. And so cell-based protein, honestly, it was kind of a vernacular that was the public kind of grabbed a hold of and ran away with, and it was something that was a little bit more difficult to try and correct. So when we talk about cell-based protein, what we are talking about is something that is derived essentially from a muscle tissue. I will mention though, when we talk about cell-based protein, it's important that that it is noted and that you understand we don't call that meat. And American Farm Bureau has policy on the books that states we do not support calling anything that would be derived in this manner meat. So while we use the term cell-based protein, that's as close as we can get to properly describing how it's derived without getting to the point of calling it meat. At American Farm Bureau, meat is what you think of conventionally, and we stand by that, and we refuse to call this product meat.
Go ahead, Chelsea. So the question, Scott, is: are you aware if AFBF has any literature, basically, on maybe a comparison between your cell-based proteins and actual beef, so that we as producers might be able to better explain it to people?
Absolutely. Yep. We've got some literature. I'd be happy to pass that along to Wyoming Farm Bureau staff that can get that to you. Michael Nepview on our staff is an economist. He handles all the livestock economist issues. He and I work in tandem. We've developed some literature that would help describe that for you. So absolutely, yeah, we have that, and we'd be happy to share it, kind of differentiating between the two. That brings up a good point, and something I'd like to mention. And if I had a slide deck available to share with you, it'd be obvious to show it, but this was probably 18 months ago. There was a journal or an article in the Wall Street Journal published on cell-based protein. And as you all know, with these articles, you click on them and there's some pictures associated with them, right? Typically the pictures come from Getty Images or some type of, a photo bank, right? And in this Wall Street Journal article, there was a picture of a person with blue latex gloves, that white lab coat. There's a microscope sitting in the background, and there's a petri dish, right? And it has meat in it. And they're referring to that picture as, they're using that as a photograph of what cell-based protein could look like. Well, guess what? It's not, that's not what it is at all. This is a stock photo of a Petri dish shoved full of ground beef that has the blue latex gloves and this appearance that that's what it would look like if it were manufactured. That's false. I mean, it just is. And they don't claim for it to be, cell-based protein. But if you read the caption on the image in this Wall Street Journal article, it says, ground beef in Petri dish held by latex gloves, that. So it's mind-boggling to me that the consumer or the general public that read that article, they saw that picture and they thought that's what this product looks like. We don't know. This technology is held so closely by those developing it because they have so much to either lose or gain by its success or failure that we don't know what it looks like. I know when this product first came to light in the United Kingdom, the only people that have ever tasted it were employees of the company. And they were, not just general employees, but the CEO of the company would be the only one that you would ever see in like that 2-minute news clip about it, consuming it. It was also worth noting that, again, this was a year, 18 months ago, they would not show the product uncooked. They would only show it once it had been cooked. So you would get a cell-based chicken nugget, right? And it was breaded and fried or cooked, however baked, I don't know. But you never saw that product before it was cooked. So we don't really know what this stuff looks like. The general public doesn't. So every time you read an article in the Wall Street Journal or whatever publication, and they've got that picture of that Petri dish, know that that's 80-20 bought down at Walmart, stuffed in that Petri dish, and they're just using that as a sensational thing to grab your attention for you to read the article. That's not what the product looks like. Are there any other questions? If not, we have a little bit of time remaining. I can kind of jump into what we expect out of Congress on general livestock issues over the next year. But otherwise, I would love to entertain any additional comments or questions anyone has.
I certainly don't see any, Scott, so go ahead.
Okay. Well, all right. So let's totally shift gears here. We'll leave the cell-based protein and the gene-edited animals to the side. So, I imagine there's a lot of cattle ranchers in the audience, and certainly hats off to you for getting through 2020. It was a hell of a year, and everything from the start of coronavirus to now. We've just seen, not only the market kind of collapse and then regain itself. Fortunately, we ended 2020 in somewhat of a high mark in the cattle business. But as I look back on 2020, desperate times called for desperate measures. And when we were in the throes of coronavirus, a lot of producers really went to their legislators up in arms because they were concerned about the packers, what they were doing to the industry and what they were doing in the marketplace, what we could do about it. We saw, a lot of issues like mandatory minimum negotiated trade. The big one being floated out there is Chuck Grassley's 5014 bill, which would require any major packer to acquire 50% of their kill capacity over the next let me rephrase that, would require them to obtain 50% of their cattle intake via negotiated trade within 14 days delivery. So as you can imagine, a lot of these packers are buying cattle on formula or on the grid. Price discovery was a lot of folks in the countryside felt was lacking And by implementing a bill like 5014 was going to increase price discovery and potentially increase prices. I will say that, in my opinion, and that of the economists at American Farm Bureau, simply increasing price discovery does not necessarily mean we will see higher prices. But needless to say, that was an issue that was very top of mind. We saw a huge amount of interest in smaller meat packers, those that aren't owned by the big four, play a more significant role in our supply chain. We saw those big packing plants go down, have to be offline for 10 or 14 days. I know the Greeley JBS plant there in Greeley, Colorado was down for a period of time not because of any food safety issue, but just because the workers in the plant had come down with COVID. And so we saw a groundswell of a lot of legislative initiatives in 2020 trying to address the cattle market. The vehicle by which these initiatives typically would ride on is called livestock mandatory reporting, and that is reauthorized every 5 years, and it is the piece of legislation that requires your local stockyard, to print that weekly sales sheet, about 100 weight, that gives you a range of prices that were sold, that those cattle were sold at over the week. It also requires the packers, when confidentiality requirements are met, to disclose what they bought fed cattle at. So we were due for a livestock mandatory reporting reauthorization September 30th of 2020, which would have been the end of the fiscal year for the federal government. We had several continuing resolutions of government funding that happened. Anyway, though that reauthorization was extended through those CRs, and then ultimately, I think it was just a few days after Christmas that President Trump signed the omnibus government funding package that also included this last COVID relief aid package. CFAP 3 is what we're calling it. So in that piece of legislation was a 1 year 1 year extension of the current authorization of livestock mandatory reporting. So essentially what that does is set the stage for these issues to continue to be debated, knowing that September 30th, 2021, we're going to have to reauthorize livestock mandatory reporting. I anticipate in this coming year, a lot of legislation be proposed and introduced that would address a mandatory minimum negotiated trade, risk management for those that might have a smaller operation and certainly not a full futures contract worth of cattle to hedge. If you had some easy to access risk management tools in your wallet to utilize, maybe you could have avoided a lot of the risk that presented itself when COVID hit. So risk management will be a hot topic, mandatory minimum negotiated trade. And then again, the small capacity meat packing. So we saw some legislation passed in the last bill on small capacity meat packing, being that, a lot of these custom slaughter facilities that aren't USDA inspected, we now have grants available to them to become USDA inspected. Of course, unless that meat is USDA inspected, it can't be sold in your local grocery store. So the idea is that if some of these smaller capacity packing plants could become USDA inspected, that would have alleviated a lot of the, lack of supply in the grocery store that we saw back when COVID was in its throes in late March, early April. So 2021 is gearing up to be a big year on the livestock front from a policy perspective, with livestock mandatory reporting being the vehicle that anything on mandatory minimum negotiated trade or small capacity meat packing or risk management, that's the vehicle. So we are intimately involved in that. Of course, we saw the Senate majority flip. We had in the 116th Congress and the Congress that just ended, we had Senator Pat Roberts of Kansas was the chairman of the Senate Agriculture Committee. Now we move into a democratically controlled Senate. So we will likely see Debbie Stabenow be the chairwoman of the Senate Agriculture Committee. She will be, the person that we'll have to negotiate with as we move forward on livestock mandatory reporting reauthorization. So, there's not much more to say about it other than we anticipate a lot happening on this front. We have good policy, some that was just passed at our recent convention to take to them in support of some of these issues. With that, I'll kind of open it up to any questions that anyone may have or anything like that. I will have to give a shameless self-promotion plug, knowing that our annual convention was done virtually and all of the workshops and the seminars are available for the next 90 days, just about. I encourage you to get on line. If you missed the live workshops that we did with American Farm Bureau on a lot of these issues, you still can access the recording of them. There's one where myself, Michael Nephew at American Farm Bureau, and Dr. Daryl Peel, who's an economist at Oklahoma State, we kind of break down what happened in 2020, what Daryl Peel kind of looked into 2021 in the cattle markets, and I kind of gave you what I just talked about from a legislative front. There's also another presentation done that is extremely informative, done by Kate Miller, who's rather popular on social media. And she's the chief operating officer of Fort Worth Meat Packers, which is a regional packer in Fort Worth. And she kind of breaks down exactly, from their perspective, what they experienced in 2020 and why what happened from the perspective of a packer who is trying to sell into retail, trying to sell to restaurants, how that whole supply chain broke down and how they coped with it. So I would encourage you to go back and look at those. They're extremely informative. But with that, I'll kind of open it up to any last minute questions you all might have on the cattle markets in general and any policy that we see might move in the next year or so.
Go ahead, Chelsea. The question is, Scott, do you foresee anything else happening with cool labeling and EID tags?
So country of origin labeling is one. Yeah, I would imagine we'll see some legislation there. At American Farm Bureau, we recently passed a policy that simply removed the word voluntary from our country of origin labeling policy. So we support country of origin labeling at American Farm Bureau so long as it's WTO compliant, which is really the big hurdle that we have to get over. From an RFID tag traceability standpoint, I'd love to clear the air on kind of where USDA is going with that, because this is something that I hate it for y'all's sake, but it's something that USDA has done a really poor job of trying to explain where they're going with it. And I know I'm over time, but I feel like this would be important to address. So I'll just take the prompt from that question to kind of talk about RFID and how USDA plans to move forward with that. So USDA plans to implement mandatory RFID tags in the future for cattle and bison. But I wouldn't be alarmed by it at this point in time, because the only policy that USDA has on the issue at this point in time would begin in 2023. And that is for, and so the only animals that would be required to have an RFID tag, and when I say animals, I'm talking about cattle and bison. So the only animals that were required to have RFID tags as permanent identification in 2023 are sexually intact animals over 18 months of age. But the big caveat, and something that you all will find very important in Wyoming, is that a brand can be accepted as a permanent form of identification so long as the state it's being sent to accepts the brand. So Montana, I'm sure, would accept the brand. So to put a couple scenarios in there, 2023 rolls around, we have mandatory RFID tags for that subset of animals. If you are, running your cattle on BLM, you come in, you wean your calves, you take them to the livestock market, you ban them, take them to the livestock market. If that livestock market's inside of Wyoming, whether they're sexually intact or not, as long as they're under 18 months of age, they don't have to be branded or tagged with an RFID tag. You're good. If you do the same thing, but you might sell at a stockyard, you might sell those weanlings at a stockyard outside of Wyoming. As long as they're under 18 months of age, they don't have to be branded or tagged with an RFID tag. The only, really big, burden that might be on folks, again, or say you've got a ranch in Montana and you've got a ranch in Wyoming, and you're bringing bulls across, or you're bringing mama cows across. Obviously, they'd be over 18 months of age and sexually intact. If they're not branded, they would require an RFID tag. Another thing that's important to note is that at American Farm Bureau, we are adamant that USDA pay for that RFID tag, because you can currently get that metal bangs tag for free through your veterinarian, and we don't want there to be any additional burden to producers by having to pay for an RFID tag. So we're advocating, and USDA has dollars in place that they would pay for that RFID tag. But again, that's only for sexually intact animals that cross state lines that don't have a brand after 2023.
Yeah, go ahead. So, Scott, the question is, what is Farm Bureau policy on blockchains for producers?
What is Farm Bureau's policy on blockchains for producers? Is that correct?
Yes.
So we don't really have, I'll be honest, I don't think we have any policy on blockchain technology. There's been a lot of discussion, and I'm going to make the assumption here, so bear with me. I'm going to make the assumption that the person asking the question is talking about blockchain technology within RFID tags and traceability. We don't have policy on how blockchain would play a role in traceability. I think, and I'm not a student of blockchain, but I kind of have a general idea or understanding of the technology. And the big thing, the most significant aspect of blockchain technology is that it's anonymous, and it protects. It would protect the information that's captured in blockchain. From an RFID perspective, we also at American Farm Bureau have very strong policy that the information captured in that RFID tag, which can be quite a bit of information. Again, the government really only cares about disease traceability on that RFID tag. Any additional information that's captured in that RFID tag would be from a marketability standpoint, right? So that would be, the onus would be on the producer to add that information to the RFID tag for any type of marketability premium that you would seek to obtain through it being in that RFID tag. But we have strong policy at Farm Bureau that that information cannot be FOIA'd. Freedom of Information Act, animal rights activists or any other type of activist organization or anyone in the general public cannot file a FOIA request to get the RFID, to get the information that might be on the RFID tags of your cattle.
Where can we find more information on the grants? He wants to know where we can find more information on the grants for the small slaughter plants.
Great question. So just today, in fact, at 2:30 Eastern this afternoon, USDA finally held a stakeholder meeting in which they disclose how they plan to implement what was passed in the latest CFAP, the last supplemental COVID-19 aid package. So in that, we saw there's going to be a plus up for folks that have that have hogs. There's some contract grower aid there. The legislation that passed for small capacity meat packing grants to become USDA certified was in that legislation. So we anticipate, if not already, and I'll be honest, I haven't looked at it since 2:30 this afternoon, but that information on how you would apply for that grant and all the means necessary to obtain that money would be on USDA's website. And I believe that's usda.gov/CFAP. So, to whoever it was that asked that question, feel free to follow up with Wyoming Farm Bureau, who can follow up with me. I'll be sure to find exactly where the application and all the necessary requirements to apply for that grant exist, and we'll make sure that you have it.
Thank you guys very much for your questions, and thank you, Scott, very much for your presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you all very much, and certainly feel free to if you have any additional questions, reach out to Wyoming Farm Bureau. They can get in touch with me if they don't already have the answer. But I always like to end these conversations being that you've got a friend here in Washington that gets it. I worked on a ranch in eastern or western Nebraska in the Sand Hills, and I worked at a feedlot in eastern Colorado. I've been right there close to that southeastern corner of Wyoming. So I get it. And when I go to Capitol Hill and we talk about the cattle industry and livestock markets, I can talk about, 1.1 mils per hundredweight subcutaneous shots of Draxxin, just like I can any type of government aid that might benefit our producers. So you've got a friend in the livestock industry and me. So feel free to reach out, and certainly I find it an honor to advocate on your behalf.
Well, thank you. We appreciate it very much, Scott. Thank you for your time.
All right. Thank you all. Take care.
You too. All right, guys. Thank you very much. Another thanks to Scott Bennett for that presentation. We've got some time now, guys, between now and our social at 6:30. You guys are welcome to go up to the hotels, whatever you want, but